Welcome to Getting Savvy with Nanticoke River Grasses. My name is Beth Wasden. I'm the Volunteer and Outreach Coordinator here at the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. I want to thank you all for attending today's workshop. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically giving you a tiny bit of background on the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. I realize that some of you are more familiar with us than others. Then we're going to be looking at historical river grasses in the Nanticoke River watershed, then looking at some of the more common grasses that you could find in the watershed, along with common grasses in the Chesapeake Bay region itself overall. Lastly, we'll be talking about the Tier 1 protocol and what you need to do in order to conduct Tier 1 surveys. We'll briefly talk about the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 and discuss what you will need to do if you're interested in conducting Tier 2 surveys. But my hope is by the time you leave today with the materials that we're going to provide you in hand, that you'll feel comfortable going through those and conducting Tier 1 surveys. If you're only interested in conducting Tier 1 surveys, that's fine, but there's really not a huge difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2. And we in the Chesapeake Bay program are able to get much better data with a Tier 2 survey. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Chesapeake Bay Trust for supporting this initiative along with the Purdue Foundation and of course the Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers, which is part of the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative. There we go. Okay, so first of all, the NWA, what's our mission? So we foster partnership and progress in conserving the natural, cultural, and recreational resources of the Nanticoke River watershed through dialogue, collaborative outreach, and education. To that end, we have several major programs, and they may vary from year to year depending on grants and different funding opportunities. Our perennial mainstay major program is our Nanticoke Creek Watchers volunteer monitoring program. And I do know there are some creek watchers here, so welcome to all of you and thank you for attending. This year we are also continuing outreach to residential and churches in the Delaware portion of the watershed, and we're undertaking some cost share plantings. We are also hosting some homeowner workshops. Normally like this, we would be doing it in person, but instead, Sydney and I are going to be holding a native planting series in the month of July. And if you look on the right there on the screen, you're going to see a flyer, and that shows you the 4 programs that we're going to be holding in the month of July. All of those are free. They will be just like this program held on Zoom with information sent to you after you register. First program is Native Trees for the Birds and the Bees and the Seas, and that will be held this coming Thursday, July 2 at 6 p.m. So you can go to nanticokeriver.org/native-series to register for one or for all of those programs. We also are working with farmers this year to install bioreactors that will filter runoff from cropland. We're also doing a series of poultry house pollinator plantings where we're going to be doing pollinator plantings in between chicken houses. Also, we support the recreational use of the river and think that's a really critical way to connect people with waterways. We have a website, Paddle the Nanticoke, that looks at all of the different public access points in the Nanticoke River watershed and also neighboring Fishing Bay. So again, I know some of you are more familiar with the Nanticoke River than others are. So just briefly on the right, you can see a Google map with the watershed itself highlighted in a light green. It starts roughly in southern Kent County, goes through Harrington, goes west through Caroline County and includes Federalsburg, goes down to a sliver of Dorchester County, east to Wicomico, And of course, we come back around with a big chunk of western Sussex County. So on the river main stem itself, the river is mesohaline from roughly Tyaskin, Maryland, south to the mouth. And mesohaline is 5 to 15 parts per thousand. Oligohaline is about 1/2 to 5 parts per thousand. And that's roughly north of Tyaskin to Riverton, Maryland. And then it's freshwater north of there. The lower creeks in Maryland, so for example, Quantico Creek, Watipquin, Rowastico, those creeks have varying salinities. So the closer you are to the main stem of the river, then the saltier those waterways will be. If you're in Delaware, you're pretty much guaranteed that waterways are either going to be tidal fresh or non-tidal. So what are river grasses? First of all, if you're familiar with the term submerged aquatic vegetation, which is also referred to as SAV, those are the same thing as river grasses. So the category of SAV or river grasses includes true seagrasses, estuarine plants, and freshwater plants as well. So this is pretty cool to me, but it's the only group of flowering plants, which are also known as angiosperms, to return to the sea after having evolved on land. So quickly looking on the right, this is an illustration of wild celery, which is one of the more common grasses that we find in the Chesapeake Bay region and in the watershed. It's a really good example species to look at because you can see that it is comprised of rhizomes or runners. And we have land-based plants that, you know, have the same sort of characteristics. So this is growing completely underwater. And so SAV are rooted vascular. That means they have veins to deliver nutrients. Flowering plants that are fully submerged. The only thing that may be on the surface would be flowers. But otherwise that plant needs to be fully submerged at all in the complete tidal cycle. If it's a tidal site or if it's non-tidal, it needs to be deep enough where it can remain submerged. So SAV can reproduce through sexual means, such as seeds, for example, and asexual means. So again, if we look at these rhizomes, you can see that wild celery, for example, can colonize really easy through these runners. Pieces can also break off and they can take root elsewhere. So that's another way that SAV can reproduce. So some of these plants are monoecious, and that means that they have male and female reproductive parts on the same plant, and some are dioecious, meaning that there are separate male and female plants, and they're both needed in order to reproduce. So what are river grasses and why should you care? First of all, you know, grasses produce a huge number of benefits. That's why there's a goal set by the Chesapeake Bay program. But first of all, they uptake nutrients. And if you've been following, if you are a Nanticoke Creek watcher or you're familiar with our report cards, you probably know that the Nanticoke River has really high amounts of nitrogen in particular, phosphorus less so, but certainly in certain areas there are high amounts of phosphorus. Having nutrients in the water create a lot of different problems, primarily algal blooms. Grasses are able to improve water clarity because they do hold sediment in place. So as runoff enters waterways, they're able to hold back sediment and they're able to uptake those nutrients. Grasses are also key for providing habitat and food for fish, crabs, and also waterfowl, and I would say by association, also us human beings. They're able to reduce wave energy and shoreline erosion. They produce oxygen through photosynthesis, and just like we need oxygen on land, all the critters in the water need oxygen in order to breathe. and to survive. Lastly, they're very effective in combating climate change, and they sequester carbon. So you may have noticed that you haven't spotted any grasses on the main stem of the river if you've been out on the river. These are some of the reasons why there aren't grasses growing in the main stem of the Nanticoke. First of all, a lack of sunlight due to structures. You know, if someone puts a dock in, that could overshadow grasses. Again, these are plants. They're just growing in the water. So just like the plants in your garden, they need sunlight in order to grow. It could be a waterway that has a very dense tree canopy and it's narrow and it's fully shaded. That's going to make the waterway unable to support grasses. Again, poor water clarity that is caused by algal blooms, heavy runoff. And again, that is tied to excessive nutrient and sediment pollution. If you have a large grass bed, like you see in this photo here, this is an aerial shot of the Susquehanna Flats up in the upper bay. It's very extensive, but heavily motor boat used areas that have extensive grasses. As those props move through those grasses, basically they cut swaths, and that is called scarring. And if too much scarring occurs, it can really damage large beds of grasses and certainly reduce those beds over time. If that is not mitigated, then of course it could eliminate grass beds. So historical river grasses on the Nanticoke. On the main stem of the river itself, unfortunately, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's not a place where you're going to be able to find grasses. Grasses haven't been present in brackish areas since 1970 at the most recent. So in the Maryland portion of the watershed, there is evidence that widgeon grass and eelgrass had been present in the first half of the 20th century. This information is courtesy of the Chesapeake Bay program's Nanticoke River SAV fact sheet. In the Delaware portion of the river and in the upper part of the Maryland portion of the river, anything basically south of Middleford. And if you look at the map image on the right, if you're not really familiar with the river, especially in Delaware, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, Middleford is circled and highlighted. So that is northeast of Seaford. It is still tidal at that point, tidal fresh, of course. And thankfully, grasses have grown historically and presently in the Middleford area. We check out those beds at least once a year. Sydney and I went out last September, and we were very happy to see grasses actually a little bit south of the bridge on Old Furnace Road. So if you're familiar with that, it's a very narrow bridge across the Nanticoke, and grasses were actually visible from the bridge if you were able to sneak a quick glimpse, because that is not a place you want to not be paying attention when you're driving, that's for sure. So otherwise, anything south of Middleford, you're not going to be able to find grasses. We have some historical river grass information that was taken from surveys conducted in 2004 and 2005 by the Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife. And Bill McAvoy, who's the state botanist, he collated the data, analyzed it, and wrote the report. So thankfully we have that to go to, and we'll be coming back and looking a little bit deeper into that report in just a minute. So I mentioned that the Chesapeake Bay program does have SAV goals, and I have to say this is one of the saddest images that I could possibly share, and I am sorry for that, because it certainly hurts my heart as well, as much as I love the Nanticoke. But the Nanticoke has a 15-acre goal. And they are, I have to say, primarily looking at the Maryland portion of the watershed in these terms, because there is SAV in the upper part of the Nanticoke. But there is a 15-acre goal, and you can see over time in, you know, the early 80s, there was no SAV on the Nanticoke River, and, you know, 2016, 17, still no SAV. So that is something that we would definitely like to see get turned around in certain areas for certain. Here is a little bit of better news, right? So I started out with like the big bummer about the Nanticoke, but if we look at the Chesapeake overall, we can see that SAV abundance has increased over time. The 2025 goal for the Bay program is 130,000 acres of SAV throughout the Chesapeake Bay region, and it looks like a very doable goal at this point, and that the Chesapeake Bay program will be able to reach it. So that is good news. This information comes from Chesapeake Progress. The link is provided there. Sydney is going to provide that link in the chat box if you have that open, or if you want to open it, you could check that out. Again, that is Alt+H in order to bring that up. So we're going to flip back and take a look at the 2004 to 5 Delaware SAV survey. The photo in the right I actually took last year. Again, this is north of Middleford, some really nice wild celery beds up in that area. So in the 2004 and 5 survey, Bill McAvoy's surveyors found 15 vascular species. 2 of those were non-native and included hydrilla. And a lot of people, if they are familiar with SAV, I think hydrilla is one of the grasses that a lot of people are familiar with. It's an invasive species, and we'll take a look at it and talk more about it a little later. Also, freshwater algae. The genus is Nitella, and it's commonly known as stonewort. It looks very similar to SAV, but it's not. We'll also take a look at what that looks like as well. The deepest water depth with SAV present, and this is something to keep in mind when you're planning your surveys. It ranged from 0.8 meters, so you're looking at a little under 3 feet, at Chapel Branch, and all the way up to 2.5 meters at Middleford. So you're talking, you know, 7, 8 feet deep. And at that location, if you've ever paddled up there, you know exactly how clear the water is. It's very undeveloped and preserved and quite unique and beautiful. Firm substrates such as sand and gravel had far higher SAV populations than soft substrates, which by soft, we mean muck, silty areas. So also keep that in mind when you're thinking about where can I go to find grasses? Where am I going to have the most success? Those are 2 big things to look at. So before we look at specific grasses, Sydney in the chat box, again, that is Alt+H to bring that up. She is going to share this document. This is the Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers Pocket Field Guide. It has an extensive identification of the common grasses in the Chesapeake Bay watershed that you would find. It has illustrations on one side, and then it has photographs on the other. This is something that you can download to your phone and take with you. You could also print it out. We do have 10 copies, waterproof copies, I should say, in our office. 3 of those are designed for use with our Tier 2 kits. So we have 7 additional copies, which we could certainly lend out and let you borrow if you decide you just want to do Tier 1. You definitely still want to have the field guide because you want to give your identification, you know, a good chance. And this has things, very specific things that you can look for while you're in the field. If you don't want to grab this from the chat box, you can download it manually. And again, this will be one of the links that I share with you following the program today. So some of the common grasses found in that 2004 and 5 survey in Delaware, first of all, water storewort. And he mentioned a very specific species, but there are multiple species in that genus. And so you only need to identify it to the genus level if you're undertaking a tier 1 or tier 2 survey. It provides habitat for insects, food for waterfowl, and many aquatic grasses do provide food for ducks and geese, and it flowers throughout the growing season. You can see it looks quite different than wild celery, for example. Here is hydrilla. So it will grow in fresh and brackish waters. It prefers a muddy substrate. So unlike many of our native, but not all of our native grasses, it wants that mucky sort of substrate. So it is fairly common. It is invasive. It can also grow in lower light conditions than other SAV species. For that reason, it can be considered a signal or a signifier of a potential restoration area if there are shallower waters nearby, or if the water clarity could be improved in that area. So it's important to find in that it certainly signifies a healthier area than an area that doesn't have grass at all. So it is something important to note. Even though it's invasive, you still want to count that in your identification, and you want to take photographs and report it. Next, we have bladderwort, which is found in freshwater ponds and ditches, and frankly, other freshwater areas. So it's actually pretty cool because it's carnivorous. And so the bladders on this plant actually trap and consume different organisms in the water. So this is, again, something that where there are multiple species, you only need to identify it to the genus. You're not identifying to species. So that certainly helps when you're going in the field with some of these grasses where there are multiple species. Wild celery. So this is a really important plant. Can't really emphasize this enough. It is, I have to say, it's the easiest of the SAV to identify. It looks very similar to eelgrass, but eelgrass will only grow in very high salinity areas, whereas wild celery grows in freshwater and oligohaline areas. It's commonly used for restoration projects because it is able to form those dense colonies via rhizomes or runners. It also produces seeds that can be collected in the autumn. And those seeds actually are on the surface of the water. So again, just like the flowers will be on the surface of the water, that's where the seeds go as well once they are pollinated. So this is our freshwater algae stonewort, and again, it's several species. So this particular genus is Nitella. It does look very similar to certain SAV species, like a naiad, for example, but this is algae and not a plant. So there's another freshwater algae, Chera, that actually gives off a musky odor when it's crushed. So if you find Chera and you crush it with your fingers, it's going to give off a stinky odor. So in a lot of ways, it's easier to identify than Nitella, unfortunately, but keep that in mind. You will, there's an area on tier 2 surveys on the data sheet where you would mark presence for freshwater algae, but for tier 1 surveys, you do not want to include it. We all make mistakes, and some of these grasses or grasses versus algae, it can be really difficult, especially when you're learning species. So if you do accidentally identify this as say again, as some sort of naiad, The super savvy experts who are going to be looking at your data and looking at your photos, they're going to be able to correct that. So I don't want you to stress out about it, but it's just something to be aware of. So if we look at the Chesapeake Bay region overall, the 5 most common native grasses are wild celery, which I've spoken about a lot, redhead grass, which from its name, you probably know, hey, it's a great food source for ducks. It actually prefers mucky bottoms as well, and it grows in slightly brackish or freshwater waterways. Sago pondweed is the 3rd most abundant. It grows in fresh to brackish waters. Then we get to our higher salinity areas. We have widgeon grass and also eelgrass. And if you look on the right, the photo that is courtesy of Noah with the blue crab, that is eelgrass growing in the background. So it is very similar to wild celery, but again, they grow in totally different salinity regimes. So it's very easy to tell them apart because of that aspect. So when you're conducting a Tier 1 survey, these are some items that you're going to want to have and some items that are recommended. Again, if you look at the chat box, and once more, that is Alt-H to bring up the chat box, Sydney will share with you the guide to the introductory monitoring program Tier 1 document. And again, if you don't want to grab this from the chat box, it will be included in the follow-up email so that you can download that to your phone, to your computer or tablet. I definitely recommend going through that and making sure that you have access to it. It's kind of like your cheat sheet. So first of all, the one thing, and everyone who completed the survey indicated that they had smartphones, which is great. So a smartphone alone can do what's needed. If you're not comfortable, because I know smartphones can be super expensive, you can also go with a camera with geolocation enabled, preferably a waterproof one, or you can do camera plus a handheld GPS. You can see why we recommend the smartphone. It has built-in GPS. They have great cameras now. You just want to make sure that your geolocation is on and that location for the Water Reporter app is on when you go out into the field. I do recommend taking out that guide to the introductory monitoring program. Have that on your phone, print it out, whatever you're more comfortable with. And also that pocket guide that I previously mentioned and that Sydney shared, you really want to have that as well. So you either want to have a printed version or you want to have the PDF on your phone in order to help you identify species. I do recommend that you have a waterproof smartphone case. You can get one of these for under $10 now. They're very effective. I always put my smartphone in one when I go out paddling. I recommend, if you're comfortable, if you're relatively stable and well balanced, that, you know, or I should say, let me just be clear, if you're not clumsy, that you remove your camera when you're taking photographs. If you do tend to drop things, then you probably want to keep your smartphone in the case. And, you know, just take the best photos that you can. But it can be really difficult to take great photos while it's still in the case. It really depends on the case itself. I also recommend that you go out in a kayak. You can do some surveys on foot, but you're going to be really limited as far as where you can go and the types of conditions that are available. And of course, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate gear for your kayak, paddle, life jacket, whistle, etc. Lastly, I recommend bringing a clear metric ruler. So it needs to have measurements in centimeters and millimeters, and not just inches. It could be the kind that has centimeters on one side and inches on the other. That is fine, but we always want to use the metric system whenever we're doing any sort of scientific surveys, because we want to be consistent with everyone else. Next, and you want to do this before you go on a survey, you want to install Water Reporter on your smartphone. If you don't want to use your smartphone in the field, if you're more comfortable doing your data submission on a computer or a tablet, you can also just access the website on your PC. It's very easy to operate and to install. It's available on Google Play or on the Apple App Store. If you are looking, or if you downloaded that manual for Tier 1, it's going to have very explicit step-by-step instructions on how to install Water Reporter, how to register for an account and sign into the app. So I'm giving kind of like a broader directions, but that has very specific step-by-step directions, which can be helpful if you're not as tech savvy. So please use that resource. So you do have to register for an account. You do have to be signed into the app. And again, that's waterreporter.org or the Water Reporter by the Commons team on your favorite app store. Once you get signed in, you get your account created, you want to complete the account profile. You want to make sure that you affiliate with us, Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, under organization, and you're going to list volunteer as your position. Next, you're going to need to search for SAV in the groups category, and you're going to want to join Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers Group. So once you've done all of that, you're ready to, hey, let's pack up. Let's get everything together. Let's go looking for grasses. So basically you want to paddle. If you're just going out on a paddle from A to B, you can certainly do that. I do encourage you, if you're specifically going out to look for grasses, that you do a little homework, however, and I'll include that in tips. But hey, if you just want to go on a paddle and see if you find any grasses, that's totally acceptable as well, especially under Tier 1. So once you find a grass, you're going to need to take a clear photograph of every SAV species that you find. So first of all, some tips on taking photos. In some cases, you don't have any, you don't have a good photograph choice, and you may need to take up a sample. But as much as possible, please leave the grasses as undisturbed as you can. Especially if you're in a shallow area, it's super simple to, even without a waterproof camera, to be able to take a good picture of grasses. If you can, use a ruler or another object that you may have on hand, such as your paddle, to give a sense of scale, because it is good to know how long, how wide these grasses are measuring, along with some of the other details. You want to take the photos on a light surface, if at all possible. So if you do actually have a grass sample in hand, you want to make sure that the surface that you take the photo on is, beige or white as possible. That's going to allow the details to show a lot better than on a dark surface. I encourage you, just like when you're taking other photographs, you want to take multiple photos, take it at different angles, just to make sure that you get one or two really clear, detailed shots, because that is what the experts are going to need in order to identify the grasses that you photograph. So again, this is just part of taking some good data and making sure that it's as useful as possible. So if you do find, you're out paddling, you find grasses, you take photographs. If you have a signal, it is much easier to upload while you're in the field. However, that's not always practical for a variety of different reasons. But if you're at a shallower area, and you can, one thing you can do is, in what I found from experience, if you're kayaking and it's shallow, getting out of your boat makes things much easier than trying to do this while you're in a boat. Sometimes you really don't have a choice, however. So what you're gonna want to do is, if you're able to in the field, go ahead and upload the data. So you wanna pull up the Water Reporter app. You wanna use the magnifying glass search function that is at the bottom nav bar. You're just gonna tap on that. Then make sure you tap on the groups icon, which is the multiple people icon that is circled. You wanna type in SAV in all caps. It is case sensitive, so just make sure you put all caps so that it will be the third item that pops up in the list. It says Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers. You tap on that. That'll bring you to the Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers page. You're going to tap on the pencil inside the circle, which is add a post icon. And from there, you can list all of the species that you find. If you just find one species, it's very simple. You're just going to be listing one thing. If you find multiple species, you should list them in the order of abundance. Please make sure that you retain that hashtag Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers. So just tap in the screen and go down to the next line, list your species. From there, you can scroll down and you're gonna see the add an image option. You're just gonna tap the little photo, the camera icon to add a photo. And from there, you need to add a photo of each species that you find. So again, if it's one species, you only need to upload one photo. If it's multiple, please upload a photo of each species. You want to make sure that you share the post with Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers. If you join Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, you can also share it with us. You just tap on the circle or where it says Chesapeake Bay SAV Watchers or Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. One thing I should mention, if you're in the field and doing this, it's going to automatically detect your longitude and latitude. If you're doing this from home or from another location, like you wait until you paddle back and you pack up your kayak and you want to upload before you get in your vehicle, you will need to either pull up the geolocation information on the photograph or use that map. You can actually tap on the map and pinch and zoom in. That can be really difficult, especially if you're back somewhere on a little, a little gut or something that is off a waterway. And I highly recommend that you do it when you're at the site, or if you can't, that you access the geolocation information on the photo. Another thing that you can do is you can drop a pin as long as you're getting a signal. On Google Maps, for example, you can drop a pin. And so then you'll be able to pull up the latitude and longitude later once you get back on shore. If you're using a handheld GPS, of course, you can drop a pin and do the same thing and get that information. That is going to be far more precise, than whatever you're able to do on the map. So just please keep that in mind. And you want to be as precise as possible, just so if you find something really cool, the Bay program and or us, we're going to want to be able to follow up. And if we don't have good geolocation information, we may not be able to find it again. And that would be a real tragedy. And we want to make sure that your data is as useful as possible. So you just click on the little check mark once you are done. So tier 2. So tier 1 is that's our basic the most simple surveying that you can do. Not a lot of equipment, not a lot of additional data. Tier 2 is a little more involved, but if you look on the right, you can see it's a pretty simple data sheet. And on one side of a data sheet, you actually have space for 2 different surveys, which is really, you know, if you're a creek watcher, then you know, hey, that's really not a lot of information that's being asked to conduct a survey. You can see it does have some additional data that it wants you to provide. So shoreline type, the SAV-vy depth and water depth, that is the one piece of equipment that you know you absolutely have to have when you go out. So again, if you're a creek watcher, you already have that, but you have to measure SAV-vy and total water depth. You're going to specifically look for some other things, including the substrate or the bottom sediment, etc. But as you can see, it's pretty simple. And Sydney's going to share the Tier 2 manual and SAV info document in the chat box so you can take a look at it to see what it's involved. You can see that that manual does have a lot more information. It's a lot more in-depth than the Tier 1 survey. I should also mention that Tier 2 surveys, they can be conducted at locations where you don't find grasses, but maybe you do find other suitable conditions that could flag it for a potential restoration area. So that could be very important. So that is one way that Tier 2 is much, much different than Tier 1, because with Tier 1, you're only reporting when you find grasses. Tier 2 could be reporting an area where, hey, this really stands out as having, you know, really good water clarity, or it's shallow enough, you know, we're bottoming out here, it looks great. So that's a way that it has additional value over Tier 1. So what do you have to do in order to be able to take Tier 2 surveys? First of all, attend the training today, the basic training for Tier 1, which you're doing today, so yay. A post-workshop survey that's going to be sent out, that will be dropped in the chat box at the end of the presentation today. And please complete that as soon after the presentation as possible. We will be offering a couple of different hands-on certification dates. So for Tier 2, there is a field training and certification process. We're going to be minimizing the number of people gathered, and then Sydney and I will be working with small groups. If you are in a COVID-19 high-risk group, you can just let us know, just email me, contact me, and we can hold an individualized training session for you. So please don't, you know, feel awkward or uncomfortable about that. Just reach out and let us know. Once you're certified, you can check out one of our Tier 2 kits. So we actually have 3 kits that we have put together that include a SAV-vy disc, a waterproof camera. It's waterproof to 30 meters. It should be good to go. And it also includes a handheld GPS unit. So in those cases, while I would still encourage you to bring your smartphone, you could use that equipment. It also includes some other tools, and includes waterproof data sheets, clipboards, a metric ruler, a rake, etc., to help you out when you're in the field. So what are you looking for, or where should you look for grasses? I know many of you, you probably want to go out and find grasses. That's really the whole point of doing this. So first of all, creeks and streams with shallow waters, because shallow waters are, generally speaking, going to allow sunlight to hit the bottom. And you absolutely need to have that. And it doesn't matter whether it's tidal or non-tidal, but shallow waters, that's great. Somewhere off the beaten path, And particularly if a motorboat isn't able to get there, then that's a great spot for you to start. So if the site has hard substrate or bottom, and again, we're talking about sand or gravel, those areas are much better able to support grasses than your mucky, silty bottom areas. Although, as we saw with certain grasses, that isn't across the board. So again, grasses need sunlight. So if it is, say it's a beautiful waterway, but it's fairly narrow and tree canopy is covering the entire width of the waterway, then it is unlikely to be able to support grasses. If it's a waterway that has excellent water clarity, so again, you're bottoming out with the Secchi depth, no matter what the depth is, those areas are going to be able to support more grasses. One thing that you can do is you can use the water quality data that our Nanticoke Creek Watchers have been gathering over the years. Currently, our data from 2017 to 19 is available at the Chesapeake Data Explorer. There is the link, and Sydney will share that link in the chat box for you to check out. And one more time, just to be clear, that link will be included and sent out to you following today's presentation. You can check water clarity, total water depth, salinity, and additional water quality data, but those are going to be the most valuable for you in searching for grasses in areas. I will say we certainly know Creek Watcher sites that support grasses. Many of them, especially that aren't in the Delaware headwaters, have, you know, we've never seen grasses at those sites, but they may provide you with starting points. And many of those are at public access sites, so you could launch there and go up a little tributary or creek that is off another waterway. Those are going to be the types of places where you're more likely to find grasses. So you want to make sure that you're also going out at the right time. So first of all, grasses in the lower part of the Nanticoke, they're going to grow and peak earlier. The higher the salinity, the earlier those grow and peak. So certainly by August, those are done. So if you're planning on going out in anywhere from Tyaskin south, you want to make sure that you do that by August, certainly, but I would encourage you to do it within the next month. In the freshwater areas, and that includes Oligohaline as well. So pretty much anywhere north of Tyaskin, you can conduct surveys roughly from around June all the way through October. So you have a lot more latitude in those slightly brackish areas and freshwater areas. I really do encourage you to plan ahead of time. Pull up Google Maps or whatever your favorite map app is and do some research and plan your survey sites. You're probably going to be a lot more successful. It's going to give you a great excuse to explore somewhere that maybe you've never been before, which I think is always awesome when you're paddling. And it's just going, if you're really kind of goal oriented and you have to find those grasses, you really want to find those grasses, it's going to contribute to your success. So you can use our paddlethenanticoke.com website to view public access sites that are in the Nanticoke River watershed. And again, you may not find grasses at those sites, but those can be jumping off points to get you to lesser known creeks and back into little coves in different areas where you may be able to find grasses. So again, you don't have to have a boat, but it's highly recommended because you're only going to be able to conduct surveys, say at bridge crossings on roads or on public lands, if you were doing this on foot. So obviously we don't want you to trespass on private property. If you know someone and they give you permission to conduct a shoreline survey from their property, that's fine, but please do not trespass otherwise. Be safe. Really recommend that you take out a friend, just for obviously safety reasons primarily, but also because you're able to share a lot more when you're with someone. If you really don't want to go out with anyone, please at least let someone you know where you're going and when you're expected back, just in case there's some kind of problem. And take your cell phone. So what are our next steps? So first of all, after today, with those documents, looking through those, of course, before you go out and making sure you have Water Reporter all set up, you can begin exploring and conducting Tier 1 surveys with the Water Reporter app. Again, please take that brief post-workshop survey on Google, and Sydney will share that link in the chat box. That will, again, I think this is the last time I will say it, that'll go out in the post-workshop email. So if you don't grab it here, you can certainly grab it in that email. Next, after today, you can sign up for Tier 2 field training and certification. I'll send up a follow-up email with some dates that we'll be offering that. If you know for certain that you are interested, please just go ahead and feel free to email me and let me know. And then after that, you'll be able to check out a Tier 2 kit if needed, or you can use your own equipment and get exploring and reporting and conducting those meteor surveys. So here is our resources list. And again, this is what I'm going to be, I guess it wasn't the last time, so I lied, haha. So this is the last time. This is what you will be getting in email following the workshop today, so that you have all of these resources. You can go through them in your own time. Just like anything else, you're going to have to do a little bit of homework, but hopefully what I have provided you today gives you, you know, pretty much what you need in order to go out and conduct basic surveys. So, So Sydney, I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, it did it for a second. Okay, Sydney, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. So were there any questions previously?
So we have one from Miss Kathy.
Okay.
So if we leave the grasses undisturbed, how do you want us to photo the grass with a light background?
So again, if you're doing that, for the most part, it's going to be pretty shallow. So the background should already be fairly light. That's if you can get a good photo. That's why I was saying, if it's possible, take a photo with the grasses undisturbed. If you have to, take a small sample, if there are enough grasses in the area. You could also, I mean, really, if it's completely submerged, it's going to be difficult to do without taking a small sample. But some of these smaller grasses, you should just be able to photograph as they are. If you're using the waterproof camera, that's going to make things a little bit easier, because you can, just put the camera under the water and snap some photos, check them on the camera before you leave the site, and just make sure that they're good.
All right, and we have a second question from Miss Linda. How do we know that two of us are not surveying the same location?
The only way to know that is, I would recommend that, if it's a Tier 1 survey, then you can certainly open up the Water Reporter app and see recent reports. That could help you know. If it's a Tier 2 survey, there is really no good way to know until that data has been processed. Having said that, there are loads of different waterways, so I don't want to say it's impossible for you to survey the same location, but hopefully there are, hopefully that won't happen, because I know that would be disappointing for you. And, you know, I guess we could, you know, I hadn't really thought about that. We can look into developing something for volunteers as we get the data back. So if you're doing a tier 2 survey, we could put together like a Google map that we share with volunteers. So I hadn't considered that, but that's something I'm certainly willing to do, because I really don't want people to duplicate. And that's, you know, that's a good question.
And we don't have any other questions at this time.
So,
oh, never mind.
Okay.
Question from Ms. Kim. Are you interested in Broad Creek?
We're interested everywhere, but Kim, you know, I can tell you from that 2004 to 5 survey, and just based on my own experiences on Broad Creek, it's very unlikely that you're going to find SAV on Broad Creek. If you want to try a creek that is connected to Broad Creek, I think you would have much better chance of success. So again, not out on Broad Creek itself, but maybe there's a small trib that connects with Broad Creek. It's a little bit shallower, maybe the water clarity is better. But in the 2004 to 5 survey, no grasses were found on Broad Creek itself.
All right, and our next question is, how often do we survey the same location?
So if you're surveying the same location, you don't want to do it more than twice. So, and if you're going to do that, you want to go once early in the season. So again, if we're talking about slightly brackish and freshwater areas, you would want to do that, say in June or July, and then in September or October. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today.